I remember the first time I ever shared my personal story, my conversion story, as a priest. I was in Pensacola, Florida, I believe. Yeah, that was the first time. And when I finished it, there was a great reaction from the people, and an elderly Monsignor walked up, and he was shaking his head. And he said, "Young man," I was young then, he said, "Young man, that's a tremendous story. That's a great story. But is it true?" And I said, "Oh, Monsignor, even I couldn't make up something like that." And I surely couldn't. To this day, it kind of boggles my own mind, the goodness of God and how far He can bring a soul when He wants to. I've done it many times since, and with each passing year, I come to appreciate a little bit more the goodness, the great goodness of God. You know, God's very name is mercy. God's name is mercy. He is mercy. He doesn't just have mercy. God is mercy itself. Let me just begin by reading to you from my favorite book, from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 15. You know, chapter 15, Gospel of Luke, is a tremendous, you might call it the Magna Carta of mercy. It's a tremendous chapter in the Gospels on God's mercy. The tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, at which the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. And then Jesus launches into a few parables, trying to explain to us the nature of our Heavenly Father. I'll just use one of these parables to illustrate. Jesus said to them, "A man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate that is coming to me.' So the father divided up the property. Some days later, this younger son collected all his belongings and went off to a distant land, where he squandered his money on dissolute living. After he had spent everything, a great famine broke out in that country, and soon enough he was in dire need. He attached himself to one of the propertied class of that place, who sent him to the farm to take care of the pigs. He longed to fill his belly with the food which the pigs ate, but no one made a move to give him anything. Coming to his senses at last, he said, 'How many hired hands at my father's place have more than enough to eat while I perish from hunger? I know I will break away and return to my father. I will say to my father, I have sinned against God and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' With that, he set off for his father's house. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was deeply moved. He ran out to meet him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against God and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' The father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring out the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. Take the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and now he is found. At one time or another, in one way or another, to some degree or another, every one of us is the prodigal son or daughter. Every one of us at one time or another, to some degree or another, squanders that legacy of grace we have received from our Heavenly Father. And Jesus, in this beautiful parable, assures us of the nature of God our Father. Over the years, now I celebrated my 10th anniversary last year of ordination to the priesthood, but in that 10 years that I've been preaching, I've traveled many places. Actually, it's only in the last 7 years. I've preached in 49 states, in all of the Canadian provinces, except Newfoundland, and I've been invited there many times, and I'm going to go sooner or later. I've preached in several foreign countries. So in that 7 years or so, I've gotten around a little bit. And I've seen quite a cross-section of the church and the world. And I can tell you, with each passing year, I begin to see the great wisdom of God, and I marvel at it. I begin to see that God had a plan for me, just like he has a plan for every one of us. In that time, I have seen an awful lot. Some of it, perhaps I'd rather not have seen. I have stood on a bridge high above a river on a cold, dark night, one time with a 14-year-old girl. The police had it cordoned off. 14. She was about to jump. 14, from a rather affluent family. 14, and had been a heroin addict for 3 years. 14, and had been a prostitute for 3 years. In the course of that last 10 years that I've ministered as a priest and shared my own conversion story, I have received other telephone calls in the darkness of the night. Telephone call ringing and rattling in the middle of the night can be a frightening thing. I remember picking it up one early morning and didn't recognize the voice on the other end, and said, "You've got to come quickly. Father so-and-so is at such and such a place." And so I went. It was in a city I was unfamiliar with, but because of my past, I know cities. And it doesn't take me long to find anything if I want to or have to. And so I found the address, and I recognized the place. I was not in my priest garb, as I usually am, because I recognized the nature of the mission from that emissary in the night. I got into the crack house. And I picked Father up off the floor half dead. And I began to carry him out. Someone put a 45 in my face. It'd been a long time since I had a gun in my face. And when this happened, I was closer to old than young. Now, when I was young, I would have done one thing. Now that I was old, I did the same thing. I explained to him what I would do with the gun if he didn't take it out of my face. And I carried Father out the door and brought him to a hospital. Another telephone call in the middle of the night. This one, also a woman's voice, but one I knew. That voice took me back 20 years. It was the voice of a young woman I had known in the bad old days, when I had lived in Los Angeles, when I had sought my fortune as a relatively poor boy, grown up in a rough area of New York. Went off to seek my fortune, ended up in Beverly Hills and Hollywood. And that voice took me back to those days. I vaguely recognized it, and she identified herself, and I couldn't hardly believe it. Well, I had seen her a couple years before, but I hadn't seen her for 15 years plus before that. Every one of us has hopes and dreams and aspirations. Every one of us starts out in life filled with hope. Every one of us starts out in life with the seeds of greatness within our very being, every human being. And then the world, through its rejection, its cynicism, tends to beat that out of us. We begin to lose hope. See, over the years, I have come to learn that what matters is hope. You can lose everything else, but don't lose hope. In the last 10 years, I have seen people lose hope. That priest had lost hope. He wasn't a bad man. He had been rejected by his brethren. His only sin had been that he was trying to be a good priest. You know something? The world tends towards mediocrity. And if you try to rise above the mediocrity, the world will try to drag you down to its own level. Any man or woman who rises to greatness or aspires to it will experience rejection and opposition. That's a law woven into the very fabric of our existence. Well, that priest had lost hope. That little girl on the bridge had lost hope. Countless people that I have met in the last 10 years or so were losing hope or had lost hope. Long ago, it seems like an eternity ago, I can remember the exact moment where I was, probably 7 years old or so. I had just come from church with my family. And I was fortunate. I grew up in a good Catholic family. And we, of course, went to church every Sunday. We went to devotions at the local parish. I went to a Catholic school, had beautiful sisters to teach me when I was a young boy. So I had many, many benefits that the other people just never had. But I remember this specific time. I know it was in the month of May. I know it was in the month of May because the lilacs were in bloom in upstate New York.